My favorite thing that's happened out of Canada recently was when the No Kings protests spread to Canada, and then Canada remembered that they have a monarchy, so they had to change it to the No Tyrants holiday.
I am so happy to learn that the Canadian Liberal government is keeping up with Canada Day traditions by sharing with us the most bizarre Canada Day message. They never cease to amaze me. We're going to talk all about that. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, follow, like, comment your thoughts down below. And as always, share this video. There was one little detail that everybody seemed to miss and not focus on, despite how unbelievably important it was when it came to the latest revelations with Donald Trump and Mark Carney, and we're axing the digital services tax. We have so much to talk about with that, really picking it apart and also telling you that one key piece of information that you should really be thinking about a lot harder. There's also a few other things that I have heard come out of CBC, come out of Mark Carney's mouth in the Liberal Party of Canada. And you know me and how much I just love hypocrisy. So I've actually been doing some researching into it, and I can't wait to show you all that and more today on Over Opinionated.
One hopes that there's a quid pro quo and that Canada will get something out of that, but of course that wasn't announced. We just know that Canada made a concession on really quite short notice after a social media statement by the leader of a foreign country, and so given that that's sort of poor negotiating tactics, it must be a reflection that we're under severe pressure, and I think we should really brace for what might be quite a difficult outcome when these talks come to a conclusion.
I've been called all sorts of names for this one, but I do still stand by it. In the time frame that Donald Trump has been president the second term around, he has done more for Canada than our government has in so many ways. And this post from MP Melissa Lantsman that reads, 10 years of lecturing Canadians, vilifying anyone who didn't support them only to call themselves on their own bluff. Carney is methodically gutting the Liberals' holier-than-thou shtick on every single issue they told you they believed in.
A number of our allies and partners, including G7 countries like the UK, like France, like Italy, have a DST in place. They are collecting revenue from international tech giants, and that is revenue they are using to invest in their people.
Let's quickly fact check that. France, Italy, UK, and Spain have either implemented or proposed some version of a DST, the digital services tax, but important to note this one, almost all of them have paused it or scaled it back due to pressure from the United States or other OECD country negotiations. The U.S. also warned Canada multiple times that going ahead with this in 2024 to 2025 could trigger retaliatory tariffs. This was way back then, right? Which we have already seen under Donald Trump. Also, fun fact, under Mark Carney, the tariffs on Canada have actually grown. They've become harsher. They're more than they were before he was elected.
Right. So there's a number of different taxes that are at play with these companies. Several years ago, we put forward digital sales taxes. So people who subscribe, say, to Netflix pay tax. The companies already pay their traditional, say, income tax on their revenue. This is designed to be an extra tax, taxing some of the revenues that they would generate on things like using Canadian data or running digital ads or online marketplaces. And there are a number of other countries that have put a similar thing in place, but it's always faced pretty significant opposition from the United States on the premise that if more tax dollars are going to another country, less may be going to the U.S. So they've often opposed it on simply on those grounds. There have been efforts to craft an international agreement around this, to find a mechanism to make it work. But Canada basically ran out of patience, and they said, we want the revenues, we want to move ahead. And if we're not going to put this agreement in place now, we're going to move ahead with the DST. And that, for a number of years, raised real ire amongst the U.S., where if you're trying to deal with some of these trade-related issues, creates a particular risk.
And there's a couple really big problems with this one that actually does breach OECD international tax negotiation norms, which makes sense why the U.S. is absolutely furious about it, because Canada wants to retroactively impose 3% of a tax from online platforms, ads, marketplaces, streaming, all of that back to December of 2022. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? And let's not forget that this isn't punishing the big tech billionaires that they are so convinced are the problem here, because the tech companies just pass that down to you, my friend. You, the citizen, the taxpayer, that money gets passed down to you. So you're actually only hurting your own people when you do something like this.
That we're concerned about moving ahead with this tax, because it didn't only affect U.S. tech companies. There were Canadian companies that would have been affected by this as well. And so when he's got some of these powerful companies saying, hey, this is going to run into the billions of dollars and may reduce U.S. tax revenues as a result, no surprise that we would see the U.S. president say, I'm going to find whatever mechanism I can to try and stop it from happening.
And the logic of, oh, it's so we can invest in our people. Well, I mean, you could perhaps, I don't know, this is crazy, just build a prosperous economy. Maybe you could just repeal certain legislation that's got us in this position where our country barely generates any revenue, certainly not enough to keep up with the ever-growing deficits. And therefore, because you literally can't make more money than what you owe because of your abhorrent spending, you now have to add on taxes to try to generate that revenue for you. Yeah, I've seen a couple countries that have done similar things. It does not end very well. Also, this tax does not just invest in our people. It certainly does not, because it doesn't go to fund anything specific. It actually just goes back to general government revenue, which then gets lost in the black hole that is the liberal government spending.
They say that you're the Trump whisperer of the leaders,
I'm not
and
sure
that you're on texting, relations with him, and you're constantly talking. So is he still saying he wants to annex Canada?
He's not. He's not. He admires Canada, I think it's fair to say, and maybe for a period of time coveted.
Canada is a very tough country to deal with, I will say that.
But
and I love Canada.
You have USMCA in place.
I know, but
You'll have to do it.
But USMCA is no good if they cheat.
What does that mean?
Well, there's been things going on that we don't like, and things going on where they took advantage. And hopefully we'll be fine with Canada. I love Canada. Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state, okay? It really should, because Canada relies entirely on the United States. We don't rely on Canada.
Had to point this out too. Mark Carney, his current, still active, pinned post on his X profile says, "This is Canada, and we decide what happens here." Do we really? Because you keep telling us that we are only doing things if the UK or the EU is doing them. So it kind of sounds like we don't decide what happens here, not to mention what just happened with Donald Trump. I'm actually pretty sure that you just copy other failing nations and try to justify it because, well, everybody else is doing it. You know that old saying, if you jump off a bridge or all your friends do? Yeah, doesn't look too strong, does it?
Last night I had a good conversation with President Trump. And we agreed to recommence our negotiations with a view to the 21st of July deadline that we had agreed in. Kananaskis, Ministers Champagne and LeBlanc had conversations with their counterparts as well. We've restarted the discussions this morning.
Did you get anything in exchange for?
We have, to be clear, it's part of a bigger negotiation. It's something that we expected in the broader sense that would be part of a final deal. We're making progress towards a final deal. There's more to be done, to be clear. And as I just said, which answers the translation question, as I just said, is a question of timing in terms of the date for the final negotiations and when the tax was coming into effect. And, it doesn't make sense to collect tax from people and then remit them back. So
I'm sorry, what? It doesn't make sense to collect taxes from people and then remit them back. Buddy, carbon taxes? No? 8 out of 10 Canadians get back more than they pay because they paid it in order to get it back. What about the GST holiday that y'all did right before the election was called? That's such a fascinating comment. You are right, though. I agree with you, Mark Carney. It doesn't make any sense at all.
This policy actually was introduced by the previous administration in Canada, the idiot king, Justin Trudeau. It was bad policy then, and it's bad policy now. But Carney, the new prime minister, that Trudeau was thrown out after he impoverished 25% of the Canadian population, wiped out GDP, buried the country in debt because of one policy called Bill C-69, which doesn't allow development of any energy, anything at all. It's a no pipeline bill. So revenues collapsed in Canada during his 10-year reign. And now Carney has no income. There's no growth in income at all. So he's trying to find any way he can to make income. This is worth $7 billion to the Canadian economy. But obviously, it's not going to work out the way he planned. Now, he may be just testing it, but he doesn't have a lot of options because Canada's economy has been wiped out by the idiot king, and he's got to fix it. And so at the end of the day, this is just another aspect of the negotiation.
Also, I stumbled upon this online. I'm not actually sure if these are initially from the Liberal government, though I wouldn't be surprised. I'll do some more digging into that. But apparently, the Liberal government has been using AI-generated ads in order to boost Mark Carney and his support on TikTok in particular for that youth vote. And this is just, oh gosh, wow. Who would have thought 24 hours later?
Did Trump just get outplayed by Canada? One day after Trump slammed the brakes on all trade talks, furious over Canada's 3% digital services tax on U.S. tech giants, he threatened tariffs and made it sound like Canada would cave fast. But Prime Minister Mark Carney, he didn't flinch. He fired back with 3 strategic punches that flipped the entire narrative. First, Canada's finance minister made it official. The tax is happening. No delay, no negotiation. By the end of the month, it's law. That's not a compromise. That's a line in the sand. Second, Carney made it global. Canada didn't just resist. The country reached out to Europe and other trade partners, expanding deals, diversifying supply chains. Then they made it clear, we are the canary in the coal mine, a warning to the world about U.S. economic intimidation. And third, Canada set a timer. If the U.S. refuses to come back to the table, retaliatory tariffs hit in July. Trump brought fire, but Carney brought focus, alliances, and timing. So here's the real question. Has the era of U.S. economic bullying finally met its match?
Oh man, the propaganda is real. You see things like that, honestly, and you take into consideration how many people actually don't research at all. They're just kind of scrolling and see as they go. How many people don't really care about politics, and that's why their brains are so malleable to this stuff. And it's no surprise that Mark Carney has the support that he does. Pierre Poilievre wrote, as recently as 2 days ago, the finance minister insisted the digital services tax would proceed. Then the prime minister put his elbows down and canceled the tax at the 11th hour. The tax is gone for good. In exchange, the prime minister should insist that the U.S. immediately rescind softwood lumber tariffs. We need to make gains for our workers in these talks. Canadians need certainty that Liberals will put Canada first and defend Canadian sovereignty in these negotiations. To stand up for Canada from a position of strength, the government must take emergency action to bolster Canada's economy, fully repeal the No Pipelines Law, the industrial carbon tax, the tanker ban, the emissions cap, the EV mandate, and axe the capital gains tax on reinvestments in Canada. As always, Conservatives are ready to help get a good deal for Canada.
You know, my favorite thing that's happened out of Canada recently was when the No Kings protests spread to Canada, and then Canada remembered that they have a monarchy, so they had to change it to the No Tyrants holiday.
But remember, guys, Mark Carney is the crisis guy. He's a master negotiator. Yeah. Remember when he said this on CBC ahead of the election?
It would be helpful for Canadians to know exactly what you would do when it comes to tariffs. So why are you being so reticent to talk about that?
Because I'm a good negotiator. I have negotiated a number of situations in the past. I know how to manage crises.
I've been thinking about those comments a lot more lately. Maybe it came after reading his book, Values, where, he really does get into deep detail about what his experience in the world is. And he claims that he's this master negotiator. He's the crisis guy. And so, sure, yeah, he has international climate finance agreements through his creation of GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And in that, they did convince about 450 plus global firms to align with net zero targets, many of which have since pulled out. Some are suing. And also, I guess he did indeed coordinate financial goals post 2008, maybe got some consensus with G7, G20. Bank of International Settlements meetings, that sort of thing. But, let's not forget that Mark Carney never did those things alone. He had a whole team of people who were below him who most likely did all of those tasks for him. And even in those cases, he was typically chairing discussions, influencing policy direction, and consolidating elite consensus, right? So that's a pretty different skill set than how he was this hardball negotiator, because at the end of the day, Mark Carney's job was not negotiating. It was getting consensus amongst other unelected elites who already agree with you in global financial circles. That's not negotiating at all, by the way. That is literally just consensus building. That's not democratic, real-world debate, real-world compromise. It's not negotiating at all. It's technocratic authority and power and influence to get what you want. That's what that is. And so the way that I feel about Mark Carney now, when anybody says something, oh, he's the best, he's going to save us in this crisis, it just kind of reminds me of like how I would feel if there was a referee mad that he didn't get to take the cup home to his hometown and do a big hometown tour just because the team happened to win on his shift. And here's another really important detail posted by Nadine Ness on X. Lovely gal, by the way. I've chatted with her a few times. She writes, I'll start by saying I never liked this tax to begin with. Canada already has too many taxes that stifle growth and push away investment and opportunity. That said, what's deeply troubling is that this law was passed through the full democratic process, 3 readings in the House, the Senate, then back to Parliament for a final vote. A prime minister should not be able to overturn a law made by elected officials through an order in council, bypassing Parliament entirely. If he can do it for this, what else will he override next? And why aren't more people outraged by this? If a matter is truly urgent, like in this case, it likely was, Parliament should be recalled, not bypassed.
Now we face another such moment. The world is changing. Old friendships are fraying. Our economy is being buffeted by a trade war we didn't start. Our values are being tested by attacks on democracy and freedoms that we must resist. As the world becomes more divided and dangerous, Canadians are uniting. Together, we will build one Canadian economy, connected by major projects, powered by Canadian energy, transformed by Canadian technology, and crafted by Canadian workers. Together, we're breaking down barriers across this country so you can buy Canadian everywhere and work anywhere.
Bro, you guys literally just passed $1 billion to go to the Chinese Communist Party for BC ferries, but okay.
Together, we'll rebuild, rearm, and reinvest in our armed forces, because Canadian leadership is defined not only by the strength of our values, but also by the value of our strength. This is the greatest nation on earth. Together, we'll keep making it even better.
Wow, the Liberals never disappoint with their Canada Day messages. That I do know to be true. I can't even fathom what is going through your mind when you decide to use Canada Day as a day to push your propaganda, promote fear, promote resentment and hatred towards our neighbor, and to also totally embellish, exaggerate, and lie about what's happening in the world and the countries that we deal with. What? But also, this is what Mark Carney wants. Like, this is how socialists win. And you wonder sometimes why it is that they seem so gung-ho about censorship, silencing dissenting voices, calling people names, kind of as he just did there again. That was not a positive note at all about our neighbors, about the world, about other world leaders of whom he's been spending plenty of time with lately. That was a message of fear to make you scared, to make you feel like you need him and only him, so that they continue to win every single election going forward. And, you know, CBC would never once comment on that. They would never say, wow, that wasn't a really good message. Remember when everybody kept saying how, oh, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are just so gosh darn negative. Yeah, you don't hear any of them coming out of the woodworks these days, do ya? And you wonder why they are so gung-ho about censorship, misinformation, disinformation. You're a far right. You're a radical. idiots. The Telegraph, which, by the way, is not funded by taxpayer dollars at all, actually wrote a pretty jarring article about Mark Carney and his handling of all of the challenges he's had and knew that he was going to have as soon as he was crowned the King of Canada. Well, they wrote an article telling the truth that the rest of the world is waking up to, that most Canadians will never see thanks to algorithm manipulation with Bill C-11, C-18, and the upcoming C-63. Essentially saying that Mark Carney's weak and he betrayed the Canadian electorate by going back on everything he campaigned on. How he branded himself as this steady, principled, counter to Trump-style populism man, and then folded almost immediately under pressure, which Mark Carney's wife, the firm that she works for, even posted an article saying this would happen. So for those of us paying attention, this comes as no surprise at all. But they called Mark Carney's response weak. They said that, yeah, sure, Trump's approach is very chaotic and, you know, it is what it is, but that Mark Carney agreed to a 30-day negotiation window, not retaliatory measures, essentially conceding to Trump's demands without any leverage at all. It goes on to say that this is a betrayal of Canadian voters, saying Carney sold strength during the campaign, but is now proving himself another image-obsessed technocrat, more worried about globalist approval than defending national interests. And then the article also ends by actually kind of giving a nod to Pierre Poilievre's rise, suggesting that if you want a real fighter for Canadian interests, he's definitely looking more legitimate than the banker-in-chief. This is who Mark Carney has always been. He is more loyal to Davos than to the Canadian middle class, or really any Canadians that aren't sitting up there on his pedestal with him in terms of their connections and elitism. I've said it from the beginning. Becoming prime minister is Mark Carney's wet dream. This is the best day ever for him. But the thing about this that's really unfortunate is that Canada just got so strong-armed on the world stage again. And instead of pushing back, because we really don't have much to push back with, thanks to Justin Trudeau, of whom Mark Carney advised financially for 5+ years, Mark Carney brought a pen to a fist fight. And what have we seen as a pattern here? Mark Carney and the Liberal government as a whole, under Trudeau as well, of which he was very involved in, similar to Gerald Butts, who is still very involved in our government, despite not being an elected official and having conflicts of interest and really his own interests as to why he wants that role that have worked out quite well for him financially. You know, we've had such weak responses to foreign pressure, whether that be from China, the United States, or even the World Economic Forum, wanting to push us to do things that are terrible ideas. So at what point does Canada actually stand up for itself? Because we shouldn't be okay with having a government in power who reminds us every single day how scary and terrible the world is. The threats, the crisis, fear-mongering. That's not a good government. That's a very scary government taking you down a dark path that you may never get out of once it's too late. And it may already be pretty darn close to being too late in this country. When do we get tired of that? And when do we stop villainizing a leader who wants to unleash our economic resources and opportunities, who wants Canadians not to rely on the government? When do Canadians finally have that light bulb go off in their head that thinks, weird, yeah, that's cool and all that the government wants to save me some money, you know, by giving me a rebate. But I live in Canada. Why do I need a rebate anyway? What's going on here? This isn't okay. I don't want to rely on the government. When does that moment happen? Because that's what I'm fighting for this Canada Day. No, I do not think we're strong and free. I wish we were. We used to be, and I really hope that we can get back there. I'm not living in some alternate universe. I love my country a lot. I'm happy to be here most of the time, until tax season usually. But we gotta snap out of this, and we gotta snap everybody else out of this, because this is not how you're supposed to live. No, this is not okay. I'm Jasmine Lane. Thank you so much for watching. Again, YouTube and other platforms do not like content like this. So anything you can do, whether that's a subscription, a comment, a like, a share, a follow to help kind of get this message out there, have it pop up on more people's social media feeds. It is so incredibly important and needed. And I thank you so much for being a part of this with me. And not just me either, for everybody else who's in the space. There's not a lot of us, but everybody else who's online, who's talking about this stuff, who's just being real. We all need all the help in the world because we have a massive propaganda machine against us.